The dark web is often known as the darkest corner of the internet, where illegal transactions and horrifying content are spread anonymously. One of the most frightening rumors about the dark web is red rooms, chat rooms, that live stream brutal torture and murder of victims carried out according to the requests of paying viewers. Inspired by those haunting Red Rooms. Red Rooms, directed by Pascal Planck, revolves around a gruesome serial murder case. The killer tortured and murdered 3 young women in a blood-red room, live streaming the entire crime on the dark web to make money. Completely different from typical crime horror films, the central character in Red Rooms is not a detective, prosecutor, defendant, or the victims' families. Instead, the audience follows each trial through the eyes of Kelly Ann, a young woman with no connection to the case, yet who becomes obsessed with it like a fanatic. Perhaps everyone has come across a sensational crime headline, felt a chill down their spine, yet still kept reading, or found themselves unconsciously drawn into horrifying stories in the news. It is precisely that curiosity, that feeling of both horror and fascination, that makes Kelly Ann such a thought-provoking character. Kelly Ann could be any one of us, like a successful, rational, Akuno person who nonetheless gets swept up in dark information that even she cannot explain. What compels her to sit for hours in front of the screen, following every detail of the trial, as if it were an entertainment show? Red Rooms will show you a raw portrait of society, where media, digital technology, and stories of crime shape human psychology and behavior. In the end, but to what extent can unconsciously consuming negative information affect us? Let's find the answer together in today's video. A nearly 20-minute long one-shot scene at the beginning of the film quickly draws viewers into the trial of the Red Room case in Quebec province. Ludovic Chevalier is charged with a series of serious crimes, including murder, kidnapping, unlawful detention, assault, torture, desecration of a corpse, and the production and distribution of adult content. The victims are 3 very young girls. Kim LeBlanc, 16 years old, Justine Roy, 14, and the youngest, Camille Beaulieu, only 13. What they have in common is blonde hair, blue eyes, and all come from well-educated families. The severity of the case escalated when investigators found videos recording the torture of Kim and Justine on a paid live streaming platform on the dark web. A promising future ahead was completely destroyed after they were kidnapped and brutally tortured in a garage by a masked man. The victims' lives were treated like commodities, traded in the dark corners of the internet. The investigation only entered a new phase, when the bodies of the 3 girls were found buried beneath the soil in the garden of Ludovic Chevalier's former home. And of course, he became the prime suspect. Given the heinous crimes described above, the victims' families, the prosecutor, and the media were all outraged. Nevertheless, Ludovic and his defense attorney adamantly denied all the charges against him. No crucial evidence had yet been found that was sufficient to convict Ludovic as the murderer. The defense argued that the defendant had always been an exemplary citizen, with no prior criminal record. He had never even committed a single parking violation. The only evidence that raised suspicion was that the perpetrator's eyes in the collected video footage, as well as his build and manner of movement, bore some resemblance to Ludovic. However, the defense also pointed out that, in Montreal alone, there are thousands of men who look similar. The first day of the trial was tense, indicating that this would be a long and arduous battle for the victims' families. Both those attending in person and viewers following the case were left reeling by the arguments from both the prosecution and the defense attorneys. But one thing that cannot be changed is the horrific trauma the victim had to endure. At that time, no one dared to assert with certainty that Ludovic was the perpetrator. But his haunting gaze and expressionless face as he listened to the recounting of the crimes were enough to make anyone's hair stand on end. Then the camera shifted toward Kelly Ann, her face emotionless as she stared at Ludovic, and shed a single inexplicable tear. What is Kelly Ann doing here? How is she connected to the case? One thing that makes Red Room special is the mystery surrounding the main character. Usually, the main characters serve as the gateway for the audience to step into the story being told in the film. That means the main character has to evoke at least some sense of empathy from the viewers. But with Kelly Ann, she doesn't show any clear emotions on her beautiful face, has no inner monologue, and there is no explanation about her background or past. All information about Kelly Ann is only revealed through a few details in the film. Kellyanne is a freelance model with a fairly successful career. Her photos have appeared on the cover of a rebellious fashion magazine called Dressed to Dare. In addition to her modeling work, Kelly invests in cryptocurrency and is a professional poker player. Beautiful, intelligent, wealthy, tech-savvy, and adept at reading people, Kellyanne is intriguing enough to make us want to know more about her. But that's all. Her subsequent actions plunge viewers into a sea of unanswered questions. Kellyanne becomes excessively fixated on the Red Room case. She is willing to leave her cozy apartment and spend the night outside the courthouse in the winter cold just to secure a spot in line to attend the trial. That action becomes a routine for her on every day of the trial. And gradually, the details of the case begin to haunt her in a strange way. After the second hearing, Kellyanne accidentally passes by the spot where Mrs. Francine Beaulieu, the mother of the victim Camille, is being interviewed by reporters. The deadlock in being unable to convict Ludovic as the murderer of her daughter fills her with rage. Francine even wants to reinstate the death penalty for the cold-blooded killer who tortured Camille, and she feels disgusted by those who are speaking out in defense of Ludovic. Kelly returns home, sits down at her computer, and begins searching for information about Francine. Through a news interview segment, she learns Francine's home address. Kellyanne finds Francine's work email on her Facebook page and successfully hacks the account, obtaining the password to Francine's home Wi-Fi. After a series of seemingly aimless actions, she returns to her modeling work and continues to follow the court hearings as usual. While following the case, Kellyanne befriends a new acquaintance, Clementine. In stark contrast to Kelly, kinda knows time, Clementine is energetic, outspoken, and fiercely defends Ludovic Chevalier. She always wears her emotions and thoughts on her face, traveling a long way to Montreal, and even willing to sleep on the street to follow the case to the end. Kellyanne lets Clementine stay at her apartment. The two girls spend the night outside the courthouse together and line up to attend. On the day the footage of the two victims, Kim and Christine, is released. Like everyone else following the case, Clementine is extremely curious about this piece of evidence. But due to the severe violence depicted, the court decides not to show the tapes publicly and orders all unrelated individuals to leave. While Clementine is still disappointed at not being able to witness such a crucial detail, Kellyanne reveals that she has both of these videos in her possession. Back at the apartment, Clementine finally gets to watch the tape as she wished. But what she sees completely shatters all of her steadfast beliefs. Even though the film doesn't show any bloody or horrific scenes, just hearing the anguished screams and seeing the devastated look in Clementine's eyes is enough for viewers to grasp the horror of the crime. Yet, throughout the entire ordeal, Kellyanne sits beside her, completely indifferent, not even bothering to blink. Clementine gives up on defending Ludovic. The terrifying look in the killer's eyes on the tape has shaken her faith. She says goodbye to Kellyanne and returns to her own city. As for Kellyanne, she continues to attend court as usual. But from this point on, her behavior becomes even harder to explain. Kellyanne goes to Francine Beaulieu's house, breaks the lock, but does nothing else. At the trial held on Ludovic's birthday, Kelly wears a blonde wig, blue contact lenses, braces, and an outfit identical to the one Camille wore in her last photo. Kellyanne's appearance, looking exactly like the youngest victim, causes a stir throughout the courtroom. Of course, Kelly is immediately escorted out by security. But at that very moment, Ludovic, who had always maintained a cold, emotionless expression, suddenly turned to look at Kelly with a deadly gaze and waved at her. While the audience was still reeling from the utterly insane cosplay, Kellyanne continued to pique our curiosity. She accesses the dark web and contacts an account that possesses the final video file the police are searching for, the footage capturing Camille's murder. An online auction will be held to sell this recording. After several steps of identity verification, Kellyanne successfully secures a spot in the auction. On the day of the auction, at the last minute, Kellyanne wins big in a game of poker and uses all the Bitcoin she has to successfully purchase Camille's tape. That very night, Kellyanne breaks into Francine's house, still disguised as Camille, takes a selfie in the girl's room, and leaves the USB containing the footage right next to Francine Beaulieu's bed. Kelly also sends the video to the police, and the case ends with Ludovic's confession to all the brutal crimes he was accused of. All of Kellyanne's insane and somewhat twisted actions surely left many viewers bewildered. In the end, what was Kellyanne's motive? A clue subtly embedded in the film that reveals something about Kellyanne is the nickname she uses on the dark web, Lady of Shalott. Lady of Shalott is a famous English poem about a young noblewoman trapped in a tower by the river Camelot. She is cursed to only see the outside world through a mirror. Then one day, she catches sight of the knight Lancelot in the mirror and falls in love with him. Defying the deadly curse, the Lady of Shalott looks directly toward the knight, leaves her tower, and ultimately loses her life on a boat drifting down the river to Camelot. The painting on Kellyanne's computer screen is also inspired by this poem. It's no coincidence that Kellyanne also lives in a high-rise building like a tower and only sees the world through her computer screen. And coincidentally, Pentatre and coup de sa mère, the name Chevalier in Ludovic Chevalier also means knight in French. To Kellyanne, perhaps, Ludovic is like a kindred spirit, a cold-blooded, emotionless person, and she finds herself curious about him. Then, her initial curiosity gradually turned into an obsession. To explain Kellyanne's strange actions later on, there's a rare detail in the film where she talks about her own hobby. When Clementine asks her about poker, Kelly says, "If you play professionally, you'll know that poker isn't a game of luck. You have to find emotional people and exploit them. Be patient, stay calm, and drain them of all their money. I like watching them lose everything." Kellyanne sees everything happening around her as a poker game, and what's being wagered here are emotions. At a poker table, the four players are Kellyanne, Ludovic, Clementine, and Francine. Of course, Kellyanne won every hand. For Clementine, the footage that Kellyanne showed her completely shattered all the joy she had felt before. As for Ludovic, Kelly gave him a terrifying gift right on his birthday, making him drop his cold, expressionless facade and wave goodbye to her. And finally, the USB containing Camille's video left by Francine's bedside would destroy the spirit of a mother whose daughter was brutally murdered. Even Kellyanne handing over the tape at the end of the film leaves us unsure whether it is an act of moral redemption, restoring a clear cause of death for the victim, or is it her way of challenging the investigative abilities of the police? Kellyanne is a lonely person. She often appears in deep blue tones, the color of solitude, coldness, and mystery. Only when she sits in front of the computer screen and watches the violent footage from that room does the red light from the screen add some, color to her face. Kellyanne is drawn to highly provocative acts of violence, because for someone as emotionally numb as her, only then can she actually feel something. And because she is so utterly lonely, she doesn't know what else to do except seek pleasure in winning the games she creates for herself. It's impossible to say whether Kellyanne is right or wrong, good or evil. She's simply an unpredictable rebel. Kellyanne might be a good person secretly involved in the investigation, but her excitement in the face of violence is also a seed of disaster. What would happen if Kellyanne became a second Ludovic? The film doesn't lead viewers toward any clear conclusion but puts Kellyanne in a grey area to make their own judgment. Alongside successfully creating a fresh main character, Red Rooms also conveys a profound message about the nature of crime. Of course, inhuman criminals like Ludovic are the clearest embodiment of demons in human disguise. However, as we watch the film, we realize that evil also lurks in many other overlooked corners. Part of the crime lies with those who idolize criminals, represented by the character Clementine. Clementine repeatedly speaking out to reporters and during live streams is not necessarily to defend Ludovic, but rather to protect her own personal beliefs, to satisfy her own emotions. It is only when she witnesses Ludovic's brutal crimes firsthand and hears the terrified screams of the young girls that Clementine finally wakes up. But not everyone is like her. Even when witnessing it with their own eyes, many naive people still may not be able to empathize with the victims enough to understand the hatred toward the perpetrator. And that is hardly any better than committing the evil act yourself. This phenomenon is not at all unfamiliar in reality. From infamous names like Ted Bundy, to TikTok clips using the criminal sound by Britney Spears like this. Or even closer to home, just look at the comment section of a post about crime on news sites. If the person being arrested is good looking, there will definitely be a slew of online judges declaring them innocent. Along with that, the media and clickbait tactics that exploit criminal cases and the deaths of victims are far from admirable. News from unofficial sources steers public opinion, sparks debates, and brings about consequences such as confusion, fear, and sometimes even questioning or blaming the victims. the spread and consumption of information about horrifying crimes can distort public perception, inadvertently turning perpetrators into notable figures. When the media excessively exploits gruesome crimes, people no longer see the perpetrators or victims as real human beings, but merely as parts of a story to satisfy curiosity. Conversely, those who indiscriminately consume information also become an indispensable part in perpetuating this negative supply chain. In the end, it is still the victims and their families who suffer the deepest wounds. The demon is not only the one behind bars, but also exists within each person, in every thought and every action. Red Rooms is a must-watch for anyone seeking a new experience in the crime film genre. With its skillful use of color, and a perfectly integrated sound, and the outstanding performance of lead actress Juliette Greppi, the film manages to be chillingly terrifying even without a single violent scene. Red Rooms serves as a wake-up call for all of us, the people who consume information daily in the digital age. It stirs up fear, blurs the line between truth and fabrication, and creates a dangerous cycle when those with violent tendencies see such content as motivation to continue their criminal acts. Approach information objectively and rationally, and don't let your own curiosity turn tragic cases into heartless entertainment. This is now the time to spy. Really?